Welcome to the video. In this video, I'm going to be teaching you the foundations and fundamentals of 3D in Gdevelop. Now, in this video specifically, we will not be using the native Gdevelop 3D. We will be using a debatably better version. You can debate on which one's better, but we'll be using the Wit3.js extension. Now, this is a remake of my first ever video, and the reason why I'm remaking this is because there's been a few changes that's happened to the extension, so I want to make this video to make sure it's updated and everything still works. Now, the first thing we need to do in order to have 3D in our game is to download the extension. Now, in order to get to the extensions, you want to go to the project manager, create a search for new extensions, and then search up Wit3.js. Now, it's important to note that make sure that your Gdevelop is updated to the latest version. In order to check this, you can go to the home page, go to About Gdevelop, and then you can check again for updates. And I can see no updates are available for me, but if they are available for you, all you have to do is restart Gdevelop and it'll automatically be downloaded. But make sure you're updated to the most recent version of Gdevelop. Now, going back to create a search for extensions, I'm going to go to Wit3.js, and this is created by the creator Pandako, and I'll have his channel link in the description. There's the creator of the extension. Make sure to go check him out. And all you want to do is install this into the project. Now, once this is installed, we can finally start. Now, the first thing is, the way that we make 3D games in Wit3.js is we make a top-down game, and then we convert that top-down game into a 3D space. Now, I'll show you what I mean by that in a few moments. Now, in order for our 3D to even work, I'm not going to actually activate the 3D. We're going to start by creating a top-down space. In order to create a top-down space, we need ground. So I'm going to add a new object. I'm going to go into tile sprites. The reason why we want to use a tile sprite is because we need to use a tile sprite in order for us to convert it into a 3D later. And also, we can easily create maps with tile sprites as long as it looks the same and it connects with each other pretty decently. Now I'm going to go into tile sprite, and the default width is going to be 32 by 32. I'm actually going to open up my Piskel. Like I said, my Gdevelop Piskel has been broken for the longest, even after updates. So I'm going to actually just search up Piskel, and I'm going to open it up directly from my file manager. And I'm going to go into Piskel.exe. But normally your Gdevelop Piskel should be working. But if yours is also not working like mine, you can just go into Piskel from your file manager as well if you have it installed. Now, while I wait for that to open up, I'm going to name this ground. I'm going to name this object ground. And I'm going to open up Piskel now. Now, you see that you want to check to resize, and you want to make sure that the width and the height is 32 by 32. Basically, whatever size that you make it here, you want the default width and height to match here in terms of the tile sprite. So we can keep everything the same right here. I'm just going to quickly make almost like a terminal ground. It's going to be black and green. So I'm going to create a black ground right here, and then just put some green on the edges. Going to use the stroke tool and create some quick and easy lines. And I'm going to quickly create this. You don't have to exactly create this, but I'm just doing this for tutorial sake. And I'm going to download this, export it, and download it. And I'm just going to name this ground test. Well, ground 01, because I have so many grounds, so ground 01. And I'm going to now go into my files, choose a file. I'm going to go into my pictures. I'm going to go into my game sprites. Whatever you save this is of course not going to be the same for you, but wherever you save your sprite, that's where you want to put it. I'm going to go into my ground, and here it is. I'm going to select it here. So now we have ground. Now I'm going to drag this ground to the scene, and of course we could just duplicate objects to create a ground, but that takes an extremely long time. So here's an easier way to do it. You want to go into your toggle/edit grid up here, show the grid, and by default it will be 32 by 32 pixels. If you want to change this, you can go to setup grid 32 and 32. You can change this to whatever you want, but we're going to leave it at default. And with the tile sprite object, another advantage of it is when we stretch it, you'll see it automatically repeats itself. Because if this was not a tile sprite, it would stretch out, but it wouldn't actually repeat itself. So I'm going to drag this out to cover the whole camera here, and now I'm going to hit preview. Now when I preview this, you should see just ground. And of course this is not 3D yet. We're just getting the basics here, and then we'll add the 3D space. Now, before we actually convert this area to 3D, we want a player that we can move around. Now, this is not going to be a sophisticated FPS camera. This is going to be an extremely basic FPS camera. But of course, we also want a camera object. Now, the camera object won't be seen, so it doesn't matter what the camera object actually is, because it won't be being seen anyway. So let's add a new object. I'm going to add a sprite object. I'm going to call this player. The reason why I call this player because player is just literally the most common object name for your player, not camera. So I'm going to add sprite, and I'm going to just make this blue cube. I've already have this pre-made, but all you have to do is go into your pixel, delete everything you have here, and just color it blue with the bucket tool. And you can easily create the same blue sprite that I just created. Now I have a blue. I'm going to hit apply and go into player. I'm going to go into the player. Now let's go into the events for the first time, and let's add a new event. Now in order for us to make some controls, basically the controls are going to be the camera rotates when we use left and right, and the camera moves backwards and forward when we use up and down. So that's going to be the simple controls. So first I'm going to put other conditions. I'm going to go into keyboard, because this is how you access key presses. And now I'm going to put left. And in order for us to rotate it, let's go into add an action. We want to click into player, because that's who we want to rotate. And I'm going to put rotate. And rotate, we want to put negative 90, not negative 90, negative 70 degrees. And as you can see, when it's negative, it goes counterclockwise. And when it's positive, it goes clockwise. So I'm going to press play now, and let's see what happens. You can see the players rotating counterclockwise when I put left. So this is good. I'm going to copy and paste this, because this is similar code. And instead of putting if left key is pressed, I'm going to put if right key is pressed. And instead of putting move at negative 70 speed, I'm going to put move at 70 degrees. And I'm going to once again preview, and it's pretty obvious what it's going to do. Once again, it's going to rotate. I can rotate clockwise and counterclockwise. And actually, I'm going to make these faster, because it rotates quite slowly. So I'm going to change this to 90 degrees, negative 90 degrees. I'm going to change this to 9 degrees. Now, in order to move forward and backwards, the way we move forward and backwards, we want to be based on what angle that we're facing. So I'm going to add a new event, add a condition, go to other conditions, keyboard, and for the key press, I want to put up. You could use ASDW, it doesn't really matter. I'm just using the arrow keys. And up is press. Now we want to not only rotate the player, we want to add a force to the player. So I'm going to put add a force. And don't just put add a force right here, because you won't be able to change what you need to change. You want to add a force depending on your angle. Now the angle that we want to have is player.angle. And the reason that we put player.angle is because we're accessing the player's angle. So we're not just moving in a set direction. We're moving in whatever direction that the player is facing. And I'm going to put speed. And speed, I'm going to test this out. This might be really slow. Don't put permanent. If you put permanent, when you first press the arrow key, it will just keep moving in that direction unless you stop the object. So you want to put instant force instead of a permanent force. So I'm going to now put OK and see what happens. So I can see it works. If you press up, it should work, but it's moving quite slow. So I'm going to double the speed and make it move at 100 pixels per second. Now we already know what that's going to do. And the same thing for backwards. But I'm going to copy this and paste this. Instead of putting if up key is pressed, we want to put if down key is pressed. And we want to add a speed of negative 100. That means we're going to go backwards. So I'm going to hit play and preview. And now that you should see, when I press up, it goes forward. When I press down, it goes backwards. But when I turn and then I press up, it goes up in that direction and backwards in that direction. So we know that the player works now. So now that we have this, how do we actually change this into a 3D scene? Now, one of the things, if you've used Pandockle's extension before, you used to just be able to create a 3D scene. And you can still create a 3D scene, you still have to. But before you do that, one thing that's been added is you have to put an object, you have to create an object that allows you to enable with3.js, so with3.js. So I'm going to add a new object, and now I'm going to go into enable with3.js. And as you can see, if I go into the information for it, I'm going to delete it so you can know what's happening, so I can see the information again. And I'm going to add a new object. You'll see enable with3.js, and it says adding this object to your project will enable with3.js in all scenes. There's no need to place it in this scene. So when you add this object, There's no going back. Your whole game is going to be 3D. Your entire game is going to be 3D. No going back. So I'm going to add this, and I'm going to apply. And I see there's no need to place it in the scene. But if I preview, nothing will be 3D at all, because we haven't created a 3D scene yet. So technically, there is a going back, as long as you don't create a scene in your scene. As long as you don't create a 3D scene in your scene, you can still keep the game looking 2D if you want to. So I'm going to add a condition, and the condition is going to be at beginning of the scene. So I'm going to go into scenes at the beginning of the scene, and this will play, of course, obviously at the beginning of the scene only. So I'm going to add an action, go to other actions, and then with3.js. And this is where you access all of with3.js's special actions. So I'm going to go into 3D scene, and we're going to create a 3D scene. Now, this is all of the parameters that you have to put in for a 3D scene. And it may seem really complicated. It's not complicated in the least. Now, of course, I'm going to go through all these step by step. You have background color, and that's self-explanatory. Background color is simply what it means, the background color, the sky color. And in this case, I'm going to make the background color kind of grayish, a whitish gray. It's going to be like a light gray. And this right here is a background image. Now, as you can see, it shows the image ratio is 2:1, which means the width is always supposed to be double whatever the height is. And this is good if you want to have a skybox, but in our case, we're not going to be using a skybox, but just know that this is an option. And also, you have an ambient light color. Now, this kind of adds a slight ambience, a slight other color to your, it kind of adds a mixture to your background color, so it's not just one plain color. So I'm going to add like a golden ambience almost. Like I said, it really doesn't matter what you put here. You can leave it blank if you want. Now, fog. Fog makes it so you cannot see certain objects within a certain distance. We're not going to have any fog here, and so if there's going to be no fog, that means you can see objects from a really far distance. But normally, if you're making a game, you would probably want to add some fog, because you don't want to be able to see everything at once. That's just not natural in games. But in this case, we don't want any fog. And we can actually leave this blank because there's no fog. And the projection scale right here, we're going to leave at 1. Now, the projection scale controls how objects are seen. It's really weird. Like, it can kind of control the distance from which it looks on your screen. But the key thing you need to take away from this is when you see projection scale, because you're going to see it on other objects as a parameter, whatever you set it as here, you want your projection scale to be the same for all of your objects. Or else things will be very inconsistent in terms of distance, and even with collision sometimes. So make sure, just recommend it's just set to 1 for all of your objects. And last but not least, you have view mode. And for view mode, there are 2 modes. You have top down and you have side. Now, side is for when you're doing like a side, when you're not doing a top down game, because not everyone wants to convert a top down game to a 3D game. But top down, we're converting it top down to a 3D game, not side. So since we're converting a top down game to a 3D game, we want to put top down instead of side. So make sure you set that with the view mode. Once again, don't worry about these blank parameters. You can leave them blank. Everything will still work fine. And now I'm going to preview. Now if I preview now, you see nothing has happened. And sometimes you have to wait a little bit because sometimes the 3D scene doesn't get created immediately. So I'm going to preview this once again. And let me make sure that this is the first thing that happens in the game. And I see nothing has happened yet. And that's because we actually haven't made any of our game 3D. So I just forgot that you have to make your object 3D, of course, in order for them to look 3D. So how do we change these 2D objects into 3D objects? I'm going to go to behaviors, add behavior. I'm going to scroll down and you'll see a behavior that we have here. And you'll see this behavior is called 3D box projection from tile sprite. And I'm going to set you see these parameters. You have depth, you have the alpha channel, you have anti-aliasing, and you have blend mode. Now depth, this controls the height of your object. Now normally the width and length, because since this is a 3D space, we're dealing with width and length now. The width and length is by default what we set it as. So our ground, of course, would be 32 by 32. And actually, let me delete this because we're trying to make a plane from tile sprite. So we want to put 3D plane projection from tile sprite, and you'll see different parameters. So first of all, we want to hide the 2D object. If you uncheck this, you'll be able to still see the 2D object, which is not what we want. Don't check this. We don't want it rotate 90 degrees around the x-axis. Let me see. We have depth for bounding collision. We don't need to change this because it's flat. So this is completely flat. We don't need any depth. And for the alpha channel, recommended values are 0 or 0.5. Everything should be fine at 0, but if they're not, switch it to 0.5. Anti-aliasing, this makes things look better. And blend mode, we don't have to worry about this. This is more of an advanced feature that you probably won't have to worry about. But it just controls the way that layers blend with each other. So, but since we're not doing anything complicated, this doesn't matter. So I'm going to hit apply. And now let's switch the player to something 3D as well. So I'm going to go into behaviors, add a behavior. I'm going to scroll down, and we want to link a 3D camera to this player. So I'm going to put link 3D camera, and you have the field of view. Field of view controls how much you can see. If you have a 50 field of view, you can see a decent amount around you. But if you have 100 field of view, you can see much farther and wider around yourself. So this all depends on the game you want. You can have up to 4 cameras that you can switch from, because sometimes games need more than one camera. But in this case, we don't want more than one camera, so we'll keep it at 1. And we want to hide the 2D objects, and we want to link the angle. If we don't link this, things will not work the way we want them to. So just link the angle, because you can test it out, and it will not work without it. So, as you can see, now it's a 3D space, and I can move around here. But you see, I'm a little bit kind of close to the ground. It's almost like I'm a really small object, a really small animal or something like a mouse that's scurrying on the ground. So it's really close to the ground. So how do we actually change this from being close to the ground? Well, the first thing we want to do, in order to change an object's height when we're using width3.js, we can't just change it on the y-axis, because this is me changing it on the y-axis. I can see this is not going to move me actually above the ground. But in terms of changing our height in a 3D space, what we have to do is change the z order of an object. So I'm going to change the ground z order, which is going to be 1. But since we want the player to be above the ground, I'm going to change the player z order to equal 10. The higher up the z order, the higher up your object is. Simple as that. So now I'm going to preview now. And you see that I'm actually above the ground now. I can see more of the ground. I can see more around me. If you want to look even higher in the air, you can make the z order even higher. But in this case, we don't need anything more than this. So we're good. Now that we have this covered, how do we make boxes? How do we make walls? Now, in order to make walls are very, very simple, and boxes are also quite simple. Now, in order for us to make a wall, I'm going to add a new object, and once again, I'm going to make a tile sprite. I'm going to call this tile sprite wall, and I'm going to use a test image that I've already created because I don't want this tutorial to be super, super long, wasting your time. And this is a test sprite that I've already created. Once again, you can easily create a 32 by 32 image. It doesn't matter how it looks. You can easily create it with Paint Bucket or something like that. I'm going to add behavior, and the behavior that I'm going to add to it is 3D box projection from a tile sprite. Now this creates a box from a tile sprite, and this is good right here. The reason why this is good because it takes on less performance than adding a box itself, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Now here's the parameter that you saw earlier. You have the depth. Now the depth controls the height, because like I said, we already have the width and length covered for us. It's 32 by 32. Whatever you set it as, that's what the width and length will be. But the height is controlled by the depth. So we want these walls to be tall, and I want them to be 10 times taller than the width and length. So of course 32 times 10 is 320. So I'm going to make the depth 320. And we want to hide the 2D object. The alpha channel, we want to leave it at 0, and everything else can stay the same. Like so, those are very advanced features that you'll only need in a very complex game with complex textures. So now I'm going to add this to the scene, and I'm going to drag this onto the scene. You'll see this wall. Now, first thing I want to do is set the Z order, because we want to make it look like it's kind of on top of the ground, not inside of the ground. So I'm going to set the Z order at 32, so it can be evenly spaced out. And I'm going to actually temporarily make the ground unselectable so I don't make a mistake and select it. And right here, I'm going to zoom in so you can see it better. I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm going to right click and put duplicate, or you can put Control D. And I'm going to drag this, and I'm going to keep duplicating these until I cover a whole side of the wall. Now, I actually don't need to cover the whole side of the wall. We just need to test out the wall, but I'm just going to duplicate it one more time, and that's it. Now, if I preview this, of course, we're not going to magically be stopped by a box. We're not going to magically be stopped because we have to actually program collision. Nothing in coding is magic. Things don't happen out of nowhere. So we have to actually program this collision. So in order to program this collision, it's very simple. I'm going to add a new event and add a condition. Now I'm going to put if player, I'm going to put player, and I'm going to put collision if player is in collision with wall. And at the action, in order to have easy top-down collisions, you can put player, I'm going to put separate objects, and we want to separate the object from the wall. Keep in mind, make sure you put wall in this parameter because this is the object that won't be moving. And I'm going to hit OK. So right here, if I go into a wall now, I won't be able to go through it. If I can try to go to the side just to show you that that works as well, I can't go through the wall at all. Now you could have gotten rid of this condition, like you may want this to always happen, but that just makes it extra bad on the performance because that's a condition that's always running. This condition will only run when the player is actually in collision with the wall. It won't just be running in the background for no reason. So that's why it's better to put this. Now, last but not least, how do you make a box? How do you make a box? I'm going to add a new object, and I'm going to put a 3D box. Now, don't put this 3D box. This is Gdevelop's default 3D, and that's not compatible with 3JS's 3D. So you don't want to put this box. You want to put the 3D box in experimental. As you can see, this object is high load. That's why I recommend that unless you need different faces, I recommend that you use 3D box from Tile Sprite and not the 3D box as experimental. But this does have one advantage. If we go into the 3D box, I'm going to name this box, of course, just a simple box. We have the depth, and once again, that controls the height, but we're going to leave that at, we're going to put the depth at 32. So it's going to be a 32 by 32 by 32. We have these settings, but you'll see that we have 6 faces, because of course a cube has 6 faces. And the reason why this is better than 3D box from Tile Sprite is because now we can customly select what our faces should look like. So if we want to make a custom looking box, this is where you want to go. But like I said, the only disadvantage is this will make your game extra laggy because Gdevelop is going to have a hard time processing all of these faces and converting them to a 3D object. But in our case, we're not going to, well, let's actually create something that's 3D. I'm going to use this blue cube as one face. I'm going to use this terminal wall as another face. I'm going to use the ground as another face. I'm going to repeat that same pattern. Blue cube, terminal wall, and then the ground. I'm going to hit apply. Now if I drag this onto the scene, I'm going to drag this box. And in our point of view, this box looks exactly like us, but it's actually not exactly like us. And for the Z order, I'm going to set this box as equal to the Z order of 12, I guess. It really doesn't matter what Z order it is, as long as we can see it in front of us. And now, as you can see, from this point of view, I can see that it looks exactly like my ground. If I go around it, it looks like my ground again. If I go to the other side, it looks like the wall. And I go to the other side, it looks green. I believe it's actually supposed to look blue. It may be the way it's blending. Because like I said, that's the blend mode. And we didn't make a collision for it, so we can go through it. But normally we want to make a collision. And we can't jump, but the top of the face is blue, I believe, if we click into this. But that's what the top of the face is. Now I'm going to go into one more thing is how do we make objects that are 2D images, but they work like 3D sprites. Basically, they're 2D images that are always facing you, that are always looking at you. Now these are very easy to make, extremely easy to make. Actually, I'm going to add a new object. I'm going to add a sprite. And I'm going to name the sprite just test object underscore obj. It doesn't matter what you name this. I'm going to add an animation. I'm going to see if I can find a decent looking sprite that I have. Part of my settings. Well, this is a bullet sprite that we can use. And of course, it doesn't matter what you use. It'll work either way, no matter how it looks. But I just want you to be able to see. Behaviors, I'm going to go into add behavior. And we have another behavior. And this behavior is called 3D sprite projection. And it says that moving that sprite will also move the 3D sprite, of course. Of course, we want to hide the 2D object. This is the depth for a bounding collision. Now, normally, you will want to leave this alone, unless you want the object to have kind of more of a hitbox. But normally, you want to leave them flat. But if you want it to be have an outgoing hitbox, you can make this go higher. In the alpha channel tests, I'm going to leave it at 0 just so you can see something. But we're going to run into a problem. So I'm going to leave it at 0 so we can see the problem in action. Now, if you look at the object, of course, it's always facing us. But you'll see something that's already looking bad is that the object has a lot of black around it. It's not transparent. And that's why sometimes, like I said, you have to change the alpha channel. And normally when it has a black background, in order to get it fixed, just change the alpha channel to 0.5. That's why those are the two recommended values, because those are the ones that work well. And as you can see, there's no longer a black background in it, and it actually is transparent. Now those are the fundamentals of 3D and Gdevelop, how to make boxes, how to make planes, and how to make 3D sprites. Now, there is so much more to Pandaco's 3D extension. It is actually the most advanced 3D that we have. And even though Gdevelop's native 3D is much simpler, this is much more advanced, and there is a lot more potential currently in Pandaco 3D extension. Now, once again, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on any of my new tutorials and videos. Also, do not forget to subscribe and support Pandaco, who is the creator of the extension. I'll have his channel link in the description. And also, if you enjoyed this video, if you want a full guide, a full complete guide to Pandaco's with 3JS extension, make sure to comment down below to let me know if you all want that tutorial, because once again, there's so much more you can do with Pandaco 3D extension, so I'd like to know if you all wanted that. But once again, I want to thank you all for watching my tutorial, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. See ya.